Yo, 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 what's good, YouTube? What's good? It's Stormybman, and I am back. Yes, I am, for this Tuesday, January 7th, 2020. And I am here with part 3 of Profile Evander Holyfield, a small series of taking a reflect back on the career of Evander, the real deal Holyfield, my own professed favorite fighter. But this is also a introduction into ideas that Stormybman has come up with to kind of fill the space when we don't have a great deal of boxing going on. So it's an opportunity to talk the sport beyond what the current day-to-day banter is about. So it's also a chance to catch up on the who's who of the sport and sometimes personalities who deserve a second, if not third, look at what's going on, what has transpired in their careers. So Stormybman will present this from time to time, but it's kick-starting with my favorite fighter, Evander Holyfield. I hope that you all had an opportunity to catch the first 2 parts because I've received some very positive feedback on it, and if you haven't had the chance, please check it out on archive. They are numbered, part 1, part 2, and this is part 3 this evening. I appreciate anyone and everyone who has come out to return to follow up on the story of this tremendous warrior. And just a little side note to everyone out there, you must be doing something right when you realize that there's other people out there, even people who have been out there for a long time, in this YouTube community, not necessarily the LDBC, but in the YouTube community, and you find that they are trying to emulate, if not directly take from what your ideas are. So Stormybman has arrived. I'll give myself a little pat on the back for that. And it lets me know that some of those views that I catch, after my streams are done, for those who are not necessarily wanting to join in, as I said before, they be peeping through blinds and peeking through the bushes and everything, but they must be out there with their notepads and everything, writing down information and little tidbits too to help supplement them. But understand that Stormybman, when he does what he does, is creatively organic. Okay, it comes on the fly. I don't have to get my notepad out. I don't have to be peeping through somebody else's blinds, okay, or hiding behind a corner or ducking and dodging behind cars. I come straight at you. You know what I'm saying? That's why I like the real deal, because he came straight at you, So for those phonies, you're full of baloney, all right? So let me take it to the chat. We got Mark Wunderlich in the house. He says, Utah in the house. Denise Ward, salute, sister. She says, good evening. We'll listen in the background. Gil Coles is out there with the flute. Dark Truth is out there, says, peace, Stormybman. Bodru Thibodeau Boxing is out there. Kenneth Johnson has rejoined. Salute to you, Kenneth Johnson. And he says, salute, Stormybman in the chat. And John Lejeune says, what's good, Stormy? What's good with you, brother? Also want to get a shout out to D-Style Boxing. He had sent a PayPal donation on one of my streams over the weekend, and I didn't get a chance to acknowledge it on air. Wanted to say thank you for that. Shout out to D-Style Boxing. If you haven't subscribed to D-Style Boxing, please take a moment out to do so, because the young man has really been cooking. He's been a person who has created content for years. I believe it's been a little bit over 10 years that he's been out there in the community doing what he does. And I had recently, in the later portion of 2019, got a chance to get acquainted with the gentleman, and I like his style. I like what he does and like what he has brought out here. So that is my man D-Style Boxing. Shout out. Scrapbook Boxing, another brother of mine, is out there in the chat. He says, "What's good, Stormy B, man? Salute, bro. This is a great conversation on a great fighter. I'll be covering Marvin Hagler tomorrow. Stormy B, man, your content is always original, bro. I appreciate you, Scrapbook Boxing. And for those of you who know Scrap, you know what he brings. Go over there and check out his content. He just announced that he's going to have something on Marvin Hagler, the marvelous one. And that is what, you want to hear. It's like, this is what we try to do. We try to bring it to you earnest, honest, and direct. You know what I mean? So that's what it's all about. Shout out to the LDBC and everyone that's a part of the family that, this wonderful family of content creators and channel operators who continue around the clock to bring great content on the sport of boxing. And then every once in a while you get a little bit of extra that's not boxing. So that's great stuff right there. Scrapbook also says, D-Style Boxing has my true respect. And Jean Lejeune says, Marvin Hagler is an actor in Italy now, right? And he says, D-Style and Scrapbook are too legit to quit. That's straight up right, man. That's what it is. Smash that like button, people, as you come in. And as we begin to follow up on this wonderful ride, which is the career of Evander, the real deal Holyfield. So, as I ended part 2, speaking on Michael Moorer, who had upset the real deal and had taken his championship titles away. Evander found himself, it's funny, Evander found himself checking into a hospital after the fight with Michael Moorer, and it was determined that he had something wrong with one of the ventricles of his heart, which is a valve or something in the heart, and he had suffered pain throughout the bout, and the doctors were afraid that this could be a career-ending circumstance for Evander. So he took some time off from the sport of boxing and went to see various physicians to find out what was this that he was dealing with his condition. Also, in the meantime, the new champion, Michael Moorer, decided to go on and defend his title, his newly won title, against a contender out there, a fighter who had come back and also faced Evander in Evander's first title defense. And that was Big George Foreman. Now, Big George Foreman entered the bout with a record of 72-4 and with about 69 knockouts, something like that. Big George was knocking everybody out, people. But just as he had lost to Evander, a unanimous decision, people felt that Michael Moorer would be able to do the same thing. And even though Moorer hit a bit harder than Evander as a southpaw, would present some problems. But that was not to be. In a grueling fight, which saw George dropping a number of rounds, George pulled off the miraculous and knocked Michael Moorer out in the 10th round of their fight and became the first heavyweight over the age of 40 to win the heavyweight title. He made history. And in the meantime, writing his own fairy tale, George moved forward after stepping over Moorer. Back to Evander, who had done as much as he can with batteries of tests from the Mayo Clinic, physicians to find out exactly what his condition was. And it turned out that they settled on the fact that his shoulder was giving him such problems that it was affecting him in that manner. And also, he had went to see the what is that? The healer, Benny Hinn. Okay. And Evander, who had never let it be misunderstood that he was a devout Christian, right? So he took a lot of stock in these people like that. And he went to see Benny Hinn, who had declared Evander healed from his physical ailments. Evander saw an opportunity to make a comeback in the sport. And after George Foreman defeated Michael Moorer, he gave up one of the titles and decided to face someone that was not much of a threat to him, or at least perceived threat. And it ended up that George gave up both of the titles, and he took on a gentleman by the name of Axel Schultz. And as he did this, he left the belts on the table. He really didn't want to deal with Don King, and he really didn't want to deal with number one contenders out there that faced him, such as Lennox Lewis and the likes of, I believe it was Tony Tucker, and a couple of other fighters who had earned the right to get up there to face in the top 3 or 4 of the division. Now, it's interesting to note that George became at that moment a lineal champion because he gave up those titles, and they went on to be won by other fighters in battles for vacant titles. And so thus we began some of the problems that we see even today in the sport. In the meantime, one of those titles found its way in Holyfield's future, as Evander took a year off from his fight with Michael Moorer, pretty much a year off, and he came back in September of '98. And he took on Von Bean. Now, in this fight, Von Bean from Chicago, a gentleman that I had the fortune of meeting, and a heavyweight fighter who was of that Montel Griffin type of style where he was hard to hit, clean, and had an awkward style and crab-like. He wouldn't open up to you very much, but he was sneaky with his shots. He fought Evander for the WBA and IBF titles that Evander had lost, ironically. Those titles found their way back to Evander, and Evander defeated Von Bean with a unanimous decision, setting up a future showdown against WBC heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis, who had the opportunity to gain or regain the title that he had lost to Oliver McCall. There was so much that happened in between that's worth a profile story within itself, people, to explain how these belts got separated from Evander in his title decision loss to Michael Moorer, and Moorer losing it to Foreman, who vacated, and Lennox Lewis, who had been knocked out by Oliver McCall when he had the WBC belt that was awarded to him when Riddick Bowe threw it in the trash, and then won it back against McCall. And then it's just crazy, people. If you think it's crazy today, that's the one thing about history. You learn a bit about history and you understand what's happening in the present, and you understand how to move so it doesn't happen again in the future. But obviously, people didn't take note at this time. So this is where we are. Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield on March 13th, 1999, fought for the unified undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. This fight, scheduled between these fighters who could have met a few years earlier after the Bowe Holyfield fight, if Holyfield had prevailed, it would have set things up possibly in a better light, and maybe the man who would have won that fight would have remained champion. But here we found these two gentlemen facing each other, and it was declared a split decision draw, which a lot of people didn't feel that it went that way. A lot of people felt that Lennox Lewis edged out Evander, and so a rematch was scheduled for later that year. And on November 13th, these two fighters fought again for the undisputed title. And in this fight, the judges finally got it right when Lennox Lewis prevailed with a unanimous decision over Evander. So now, having suffered a couple of losses in his career, Evander sought to rebuild himself. And what better way than to jump right back into the fray in August of 2000, he decided to take on John Ruiz, an awkward fighter who was definitely someone that people wanted to avoid because John Ruiz was just not a fighter that you could land clean shots on. A lot like Von Bean, he was a little sneaky, but he was a little more aggressive than Von Bean. He had a little bit of heart, but his chin wasn't that great. Now, John Ruiz would probably get insulted by that remark, but he did not take flush shots very well, but he was very hard to hit. And in an ugly fight, Evander was able to edge out a unanimous decision. But there was a lot of grappling and holding and mauling and everything in this fight. And Evander wasn't happy with the outcome. He felt that he could defeat Ruiz easier. And he should have done this. He should have done that. So he decided to take on Ruiz in a rematch in March of 2001. And guess what? Holyfield lost. He dropped a unanimous decision to John Ruiz in another mauling creature feature, okay? And this was the type of fight that many people were feeling like Evander should go sit down somewhere now because he was starting to look like maybe what you would call a faded fighter, a faded champion. So he thought he'd get back in there and face Ruiz a third time. So in December of 2001, Evander went at John Ruiz again. And this was for the WBA heavyweight title. And it was a title that Ruiz thought he would hold on to. This was a split decision draw, you know. And so Holyfield, with the title out of his hands again, sought another fight with someone. Now, this time, one of the younger fighters in the division, Hasim the Rock Rockman, who came into the fight with a record of 35-3, looked to take on Evander and build on his career as Evander was trying to climb back into contention. This was a pretty good scrap. Evander was strong enough to deal with a fighter like Rockman and technically solid enough to deal with him. And Rockman was strong enough to deal with Evander, but not as technically proficient as Evander. And Evander knew a little of the tricks of the trade. He could get in, he could throw elbows, he could use his head for leverage and things like that. And this fight is really noted for being stopped with a technical decision victory on Evander because he was ahead on the scorecards after Hasim Rockman suffered a headbutt and his head swelled so badly that they felt that it would be dangerous for him to continue. And you could Google the photos of Hasim Rockman's forehead after this fight, and it looked like he had half of a brick under his skin. on his forehead. I kid you not, ladies and gentlemen. It was the largest hematoma I had ever seen on someone's head. He looked like a hammerhead shark. But I'm laughing about it now. I was concerned about Rockman at the time because something like that, what if it was a blood clot or something and it burst? I don't know. That's gross to think about. But anyway, that's what happened with that fight. Now, Evander managed to follow that fight up with a series of losses, believe it or not, beginning in December of 2002. Evander lost to Chris Bird, and then in October of 2003, he lost to James Toney by TKO, in which a lot of people, including myself, said, you know what, it's time for the real deal to hang it up, man. This is just not what we want to see from him. But he didn't. He didn't hang it up. He hung in there. And he went on to fight guys like, Larry Donald, which he lost a unanimous decision. But I'm covering those fights, and I skipped over a couple of fights because in the fourth part of this series, I will cover Evander's fights with Mike Tyson, because those fights I would like to set aside and use for the final show. But as we go forward with what happened when Holyfield won his rematch against Michael Moorer, this is when, he knocked Michael Moorer out after putting him on the canvas a series of times. Evander and Michael Moorer, it seemed that he solved the problem of Michael Moorer's southpaw style. It was a great victory by Evander, and it was a great show of courage and determination by Michael Moorer, because even though he was getting beat from pillar to post and going down, he would rise again like a phoenix and contend with Evander. He was not going to quit. Finally, the referee stopped the fight. But Michael Moorer, my goodness, in that fight, in that rematch against Evander Holyfield, he showed some guts that you couldn't get 10 fighters to show. It was high volume action. And in that fight, it took place in November of 97. And that's when Holyfield won his WBA World Heavyweight title back and the IBF World title before he ended up facing, before he ended up facing Lennox Lewis for that undisputed fight. Mixed in before that rematch with Moore were the two fights with Tyson. Okay. And that's where I will go, in the next show, part 4. But moving on behind the 3 losses that he suffered to after Hasim Rahman, after he had the victory over Hasim Rahman, Chris Bird, James Toney, Larry Donald. These 3 fights were showing that Father Time had caught up to the real deal. And to see the beating that he took from James Toney, the one thing that I came away from that fight realizing was Holyfield lost his legs in that fight. He complained later that his shoulder had given out on him, so he couldn't get out of the right hands that James Toney was shellacking him with. But this is my observation of that fight. Out of every fight that Evander Holyfield had, 2 of his major losses were to fighters who were great body punchers. James Toney, Riddick Bowe. And Evander, as much as he wanted to say that he has some ailments and things like that going in against James Toney, people, let me tell you, it was the body work, the counter punching, the effective drawing Evander's fire and countering with him and going to the body that took his legs away from him against James Toney. James Toney was an excellent fighter. I think he should be definitely in the Hall of Fame if he isn't in there already. But a fighter with some of the highest talent and boxing IQ I've ever seen, but a fighter who also wasted and squandered that same talent by not getting himself in proper shape. But he put a whipping on Evander, the real deal, Holyfield. And it was at that point, at that loss, that I didn't want to watch Evander fight anymore. But he soldiered on. And he took on the likes of Larry Donald, losing a unanimous decision to Larry Donald. And Larry Donald, who was of the old school, straight up boxing, stick and move type style, really not anything like Ali, but he would try to emulate that type of style that Ali implemented, where he stuck the 1-2, tie you up and things like that. And he was effective against Evander. And it made me think about if Evander were a younger man, as young as at least Donald was when they faced one another, that Evander could definitely have more to offer against Larry Donald. But also, understanding the fighter that Ali was, it made me think about if Evander had ever fought Ali, he would definitely be outclassed. He wouldn't give up, but Ali would probably stop him either on cuts, swollen eye, or something like that. Ali had a way of dealing with fighters like Evander and fighters like Cleveland Williams, those guys who would come and bring it, but he just had a way of being able to take those men apart. So, yes, I believe my favorite fighter, Evander the real deal Holyfield, would have been chewed up and spewed out by the greatest, Muhammad Ali. So that's what I had to say about that. But then he came back with a TKO over the lowly Jeremy Bates, and that was in 2006, August of 2006. And that was Evander still trying to become a 4-time world champion. And again, with that TKO, I felt like he should have been, sitting in the stands instead of being in the ring. But this is how the greats like to go out, on their shield. And he followed that up with another brother from Chicago, Frez Okendo. I know Frez. Frez is a nice man. He's a family man and a gentleman. It was kind of difficult watching that fight because of my direct relationship with Frez, and Evander won a unanimous decision against Frez Okendo in 2006. That was November of 2006. So as you see, the real deal just soldiered on, and as he continued to take these fights against these younger opponents, he was a man on a mission, and he wouldn't be denied. But the funny thing is that all of these fighters, they would step up to the plate because they thought that Evander was a beatable and defeatable fighter. But Evander proved that he had a lot more under the hood and the chassis and the overall frame, than most of these guys had. And it proved in the ring when they fought one another. There are some qualities that you just cannot teach. And one of those qualities is the will to never give up. When you have that will to never give up, you can always be in a position to have success. And when you add to that a tool set of getting through the storm, working through your adversity, being able to have equipped manner and capability to soldier on and take care of business at hand. These are qualities that they're intangibles. You can't teach these things, but they're either there or they're not. And that's why so many fighters mistook Evander. Because even when they said, oh, he's a warrior, they still didn't understand that there was something under the surface there. He didn't go in there and just reckless, abandon, slug with people. He fought smart in certain instances and would draw the fire out of someone else and be able to counter. Holyfield was a tremendous counterpuncher, one of the best counters in modern boxing, especially at the heavyweight division. The fact that he didn't have overwhelming knockout power was possibly what made him human, because if he had been blessed with knockout power, he probably would have just eaten up almost every man he ever fought. And that was something that you kind of consider going forward. Like, the man brings everything else. He brought the work ethic, he brought the conditioning, he brought the focus, he brought the determination, and it was like he had a beard. Evander took some of the best shots from some of the biggest punchers in his era and has only been on the canvas a handful of times. It's like amazing, especially when most of the heavyweights he fought were at least 10 or more pounds heavier than him. Going into most of his bouts at the age of at the weight of 208, 206. I think the lowest weight I saw him fight at might have been 206. There's something that's saying 202 in my head, but I don't know if that was real. But I think 206 was his lowest at heavyweight. But the man was more than capable. More than capable. I want to take a moment to go to the chat and acknowledge some of the brothers and sisters who have come up in here. Let's see what we got here. We got Kenneth Johnson. I've said your name. Boxing Conversations with Reggie Owens is in there. He says, salute my people. Scrapbook is saluting Reggie. John Lejeune says, Reggie, should I start on that video? I got the idea from a BFTB rant. John Lejeune also says Evander was big into Benny Hinn and thought that he helped heal his heart. And Scrapbook Boxing says, I first met Evander in 1984 at the Olympic in Lake Placid against Detroit's Ricky Womack. Yeah, I've heard Evander talk about Ricky Womack, Scrapbook, a gentleman who was a needle in his side when he was trying to come up in the rankings of the amateurs there. They fought some good fights. Jean Lejeune says, it's crazy to see Riddick Bowe and Evander now. Holyfield is well-spoken and Bowe isn't sounding great. Yeah, it's kind of tough, but that's what Eddie Futch saw on the horizon for him. Now, some people may say, how can you say that? Eddie Futch isn't around to speak on it, but he would be able to tell you more about that. John Lejeune says Curtis Hopper, Effie Ajaba, and replace Curtis's head with Fury and F.A. and Deontay. Put Fury's wife somewhere in the crowd. I didn't understand that comment there, John Lejeune. Even reading it gave me a conniption in my mind or something. I don't know. Michael Johnson, Boxing Talking More, says, what it do? What's good with you, Michael? Curtis Anderson is out there, says that Stormybman in chat, salute. What's good? Glad to see you, brother. Hope you're doing good. Tyrone Smith is out there. He says, salute to the chat. What's good, Tyrone? Boxing Conversation with Reggie Owens says, is Larry Donald the cat that Riddick Bowe punched at the presser? Yes, he is, Reggie. Riddick Bowe could have went to jail off of that one. And Larry Donald was a trooper for going through with the fight, but he didn't try to win the fight after that. I thought he had a very good chance of winning going in till he took that shot, or that two-piece as they call it, at the presser. That changed everything. He wouldn't even let his hands go in the ring on fight night. That was the time to get Bo back. Kenneth Johnson says, Stormy, I wonder if Holyfield's heart medication took something from him. Some of those meds can take a lot out of you. It's very possible. You know, Evander, you know, some people said that he probably used steroids and stuff like that or whatever. But I will say this, some of the things that he did to put on the excess muscle and weight, he didn't carry that in the off season of not fighting. He would drop back down to almost 190 something pounds or be just under 200. And over a period of time, putting that weight on, taking it off, putting it on, taking it off, that's not a good thing. You know, it can lead to some other physical problems and everything. And maybe he just was putting a lot of stress on his body, and his body was breaking down as a result of it. The injured shoulders all the time, those soft tissue muscle tears, things like that, they add up. You know what I mean? And that's one of the reasons why fighters don't necessarily need weights. You understand? They don't need weights. You want strength, but you don't necessarily need the muscles that come with lifting weights. So, Boxing Conversations with Reggie Owens says, salute my brother Kenneth Johnson. Yeah. So, you know, this is one of those things that you could say that Evander did in his youthful portion of his career, training hard, training excessively hard. And, you know, your body, it needs time to replenish itself or whatever. And, you know, Evander took hard fights too, man. I haven't even mentioned his brawl with Ray Mercer, you know. And maybe I'll mention that in part 4 as well when I talk about the 2 fights with Tyson. But it's like he fought a who's who, literally, in the heavyweight division. And there were only a handful of guys that crossed through that era that Evander didn't fight. Only a handful of guys. I mean, when I look back, I know he didn't fight Tommy Morrison. And this is just off the top of my head again. Guys like Tommy Morrison, he didn't fight Oliver McCall. He didn't fight Tony Tucker, you know, and the Bruce Seldons and Razor Ruddock, you know. And these are all guys that, you know, Tyson, you know, fought those guys, you know. And Tyson didn't fight Oliver McCall, but he sparred with him in the gym for years. That's the one thing about the heavyweight division. When your name is good, people know who you are even behind the scenes. When you are a guy that is not necessarily a threat, but you might have a name, people know about you as well. And so some of those guys, they can be protected, but only up into a certain degree. That's when they can run into problems, and that's when they can, you know, you start crashing, because the truth tells in that ring. When a guy doesn't really have what he's supposed to have, the ring is where the truth can come out. It's a shame that there are certain fighters who had ability but just couldn't put it together. It's a number of those guys. But I really appreciate Evander for what he was able to bring to the division, because when fighters stood across the opposite side of the ring with Evander, they knew they had a fight on their hands that night. That's why I mentioned the fight with Hasim Rahman. You know, it was like Rahman was really trying to compete. He was really trying to win against Evander. And he was trying to take Evander's head off. But what he didn't realize at the time was that was Evander's fight. You know, with Evander, you had to trick him by boxing him. You know what I mean? You had to box him, stick, move, keep him on the outside, tie him up, bang him to the body if he tried to get in close. And a lot of guys would go in there and they find like, oh, I hit him clean. Oh, I'm going to go for it now. And Evander loved that. He relished that. He could take a punch. He could take a couple of them. You understand? But then when he got you in range and he could throw his, he could get you out of there. And it was surprising to watch how many people who thought that they were really tough and found out they weren't as tough as he was. Like Burt Cooper. Burt Cooper had a great war with Ray Mercer. The two of them fought like two dudes who were fighting over the last glass of Wild Irish Rose from the bottle. You understand? And they were going at it. By the time that fight ended, Cooper looked a little worse for wear, and Mercer had a swollen jaw reminiscent of the size of Ali's jaw after he fought Frazier the first time in the super fight. But both of those guys, when they took on Evander, thought about quitting. Both men. Burt Cooper, when Holyfield unleashed that barrage of uppercuts on him in that I think it was a 5th or 6th round, he turned to like run away, and then he decided not to run and try to fight back. Evander was on him. And Ray Mercer, during one of their rounds, where he tried to open up on Holyfield, and he thought that Holyfield might cover up and back up because, with Mercer, when he would open up on people like that, they would cover up and try to hold or tie up or something like that. But Evander started firing back. And so Mercer went to try to tie Evander up because Evander was raising the level of intensity of combat. And Mercer went to try to grab and hold on, and Holyfield hit him with a great left hook that staggered him, and he really tried to hold on. And then next thing you know, Mercer just said, forget this, I'm going to take a knee. And he took a knee. And Evander hit him on the top of the head, too, if the ref didn't call it. But it was at that moment that Ray Mercer was like, this dude is a warrior. And I remember his post-fight comment where he was talking to, I think it was Sean O'Grady from Tuesday Night Fights in the ring, and he was like, Holyfield is a hell of a fighter. You're going to have to beat the hell out of him to win. Ray Mercer was a fool, man. But he was right. And a footnote about Ray Mercer. Ray Mercer was definitely like Riddick Bowe as far as his approach to the sport. Once he started, as these young guys say today, touching M's, okay, he began to take his foot off the gas a little bit. Ray Mercer was a fighter who at his best was 6'2", 215 to 220 pounds. Ray Mercer, by the time he was fighting guys like Holyfield and everything, he was about 225, 235 pounds. And I think against Lennox Lewis, he was 240 pounds. How can you fight those fights against those caliber of fighters not at your best? It's one of those things that make you say, okay, I see why this guy lost this fight. You know what I mean? And Ray Mercer was one of those heavyweights that there were a lot of rumors about him out there and how dangerous he was and how dangerous it was to get hit by him. So Ray Mercer was the real deal. Not only could he dish it out, he could take it. So, but that's one of those things that people don't realize, in the heavyweight division. These guys, they know who they are. They know each other out there. And there's not enough people who really stand by today and talk about the sport for what it really is. When you learn certain things behind the scenes, there's certain things that shouldn't be revealed. And then there are things that are good to reveal because it can give you an insight on, picking fights and stuff like that. But a lot of people of today can't tell the difference. This is one of those things. It's just like Big Baby Miller, right? He sparred with Deontay Wilder. and Wilder hurt him pretty bad. He had to go to hospital. You know what I mean? Now, he tried to act like, Wilder's not this and not that or whatever, but they know the difference. They know what the real truth is. And, Wilder can really hurt people. But instead of going out there and say, wow, this guy fights like this, even in sparring, let me raise my game. No, these guys run to the dope man, try to get PEDs to put in their system. But PEDs don't work, especially if you don't work. Huh? How many guys you see that they talk about have taken PEDs and they still don't look body beautiful? Huh? But that's another subject for another time. But yeah. So as we close this one out, I'm looking forward to part 4 with you because I wanted to save the 2 fights between Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson for the finale where we close out. Holyfield was a fighter that during his era, he helped keep the sport at a high level. I remember when Tyson came into prominence, there were a lot of fat, out of shape, former drug abusers and whatnot. And Tyson ran through these guys. And then guys were like, shoot, we gotta get in shape. If we're going, otherwise we just going to be a highlight reel knockout for a dude like Tyson. And a lot of them were on their way out because of their ages and the advancements that they had made in the careers. And Tyson was a young guy. Remember, he won the title at the age of 21, so he was a young champion. But when Holyfield came into play, it was about being in condition because the guy could go the distance. He would try to knock you out, of course, but he could go the distance. He could put the rounds in. And a lot of guys in the heavyweight division weren't built to go the distance. These guys, they was either going to get you or you were going to get them. But they say, damn that final bell, man. I remember Derek Jefferson, man. That brother in that damn fight that he had on that TV show that HBO had, Boxing After Dark. Man, Derek Jefferson, man, that dude was so tired. He looked for a place on the canvas to dive on the floor. It was the funniest thing. But that's another story we could revisit. Curtis Anderson is out there, says, we only saw 40% of Ray Mercer. If he was in shape, he would have beaten Lennox Lewis. Yes, Kurt, I was so angry at him when I saw him. Back then, some weigh-ins I watched, some I didn't. And I missed the weigh-in for Lennox and Ray Mercer. But when he got in there and they announced his weight, I was pissed off. I was like, I just knew he was going to get in shape for Lennox. And that was the difference. He was out of shape. If he were in shape, he would have beat Lennox. Man. And I know he kicked himself after that. But how about this, Kurt? There was a great fight that Ray Mercer had with Tim Witherspoon. How about that? Remember that fight? That's worth a profile. To revisit that fight between those two big monsters. But yes, people, this is one of the things that we could do is reminisce and everything, talking about these wonderful fighters, the events that they participated in, and what you were doing at the time. Those are great things to revisit. And that's what Profile is all about. Just taking a look back, even if it's not back in too much time. If it's current, you just taking a look into someone's career or whatever. That's what makes that special, being able to look into for Profile. So, yeah, we're going to bring this to a conclusion for this evening with one episode left to go, where we will revisit the 2 fights between Evander the Real Deal Holyfield and Iron Mike Tyson. So I'm going to get ready to shut this one down for this evening. I appreciate everybody that stopped by to listen to what I had to say as I'm profiling the career of Evander, the real deal Holyfield. And I hope that you all tune in for the next one, probably Thursday evening, where I'll do the finale on this, part 4 of Profile Evander Holyfield. So this is Stormybman. I want to say shout out to the LDBC, everybody who stopped by this evening to listen to what I had to say about this great warrior. And I hope you stick around for the finale, because it's going to be a great one to think back on what was the wonderful matchup between Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson. Long time in the making. Two warriors from an era, my generation. So, hope everybody has a great night.